Hello everybody and welcome to the third lecture. So today we're going to explore values and ethics in social work. So we're actually very lucky because Donna McAuliffe is one of the contemporary ethicists in social work, and she teaches ethics here at Griffith. So this is just a sort of introductory discussion about values and ethics in social work, and hopefully you'll get to explore this further as you go through your social work education. So the aims of today are to look and understand the foundations of moral philosophy, ethical theory, and how they apply to work in human services. Again, this is just a taster, so it's just about starting to open up those different options, the literature, the debates, and then you can explore that further in your own time. We're going to have a quick look at the historical development of values and ethics in practice, clarify the definitions of values and ethics and look at how that relates to social work, and start to think about the contested nature of values and the conflicts and ethical dilemmas we come across. And finally, we'll have a look at how to develop an ethical model for decision making, which usually helps social workers manage ethical dilemmas in practice. So, the influence of moral philosophy on practice. One of the central questions to plague human service workers is how best to understand the nature of humanity, human behaviour and interactions between people. In other words, why are we as humans the way we are, and why do we do the things we do? Well, that certainly is quite a big question. I guess it's good to maybe take a pause and think about who's influenced your values and your beliefs in your moral code. I think we'll find we're all slightly different because where we come from, who influenced us, the culture we grew up in, it varies between all of us. So our own moral code or values and beliefs are all different, and what we value is different as well, and the priorities we make are different. So it's just worth maybe taking time to think about how that influences you. So historically, the influence of moral philosophy in practice has been to give depth to human experience, give depth to the understanding of human experience, look at concepts of freedom and autonomy and how important they are to human service practice, and just consider a cultural perspective, because in the past moral philosophy has perhaps been dominated by a Western bias, whereas now we're able to consider a number of different cultural worldviews, and we've got access as well to many different ways of thinking, and it's good just to explore all the different viewpoints. I've had a lovely discussion with some of our Chinese students about collectivism versus individualism, and it's just good to start to explore different perspectives. So, the ancient philosophers, they were concerned with understanding human nature, the balance in behaviours and social relations, and were quite introspective in their search for meaning. So some of the ancient philosophers were Confucius, Buddha, Socrates, Plato and Aristotle. Then moving forward in time to the Enlightenment philosophers, 16th century to mid-19th century, they were starting to look at the pursuit of truth through science and reason, thinking about the concepts of justice, rights, morality, equality and egalitarianism. And some of those philosophers were Hobbes, Hume, Rousseau, Kant, Bentham, Wollstonecraft and Mill. So contemporary philosophers, now concerned with structural issues of oppression and exploitation based on class, race and gender. So these philosophers started to pave the way for philanthropic endeavours and social reform. And some developed different theories, sociological, feminist, anti-oppressive and postmodern theories. So examples of those would be Marx, Adams, Gandhi, Buber, Sartre, Arendt, Beauvoir, Gramsci and Singer. So, how does all of this link to practice? Well, these philosophies, they provide ways of helping us understand how the world works. And they're a starting point for analysis and exploration of human behaviour, social systems, the welfare state, politics and power, gender roles, and the influence of class, race and religion, so those structures on human interactions. And they can also be incorporated into our value base, our professional and practitioner value base and practice framework. So ethical theory. So ethical theory is a way of applying moral philosophy to contemporary situations. And it gives us a way of articulating the decisions that we make that have a moral or value basis, which is particularly important because social work is a value-based profession. But ethical theory is a highly contested terrain. There are a whole host of different types of ethical theories, and we'll have a look at some of those just coming up. So, if we look at levels of ethical thought, firstly, we've got meta-ethics. That's the broad questions about the existence of phenomena. So, what is truth? What does love actually mean? And then we've got normative or applied ethics. So they really help us to work within specific areas. So perhaps question euthanasia, animal rights, environmental ethics, and those types of things. So let's have a look at some of the more specific ethical strains of theory. So deontology, or Kantian ethics. So these are not concerned with consequences or outcomes. Basically what's right is determined by duty, rights and obligations. So deontology, if you think of perhaps the Ten Commandments, so it's very much this, you will do this or you will not do this. So it assumes that human beings are rational and that moral codes are universal and apply across all cultures and time. And it's absolutist, so it's got respect for people, with people being autonomous and responsible for their own decisions as long as they follow the rules. So that's quite different to teleological or utilitarian theories. They're more concerned with the consequences. So it doesn't really matter what you do, it's the consequences that matter. So, the means, now let me get this right, so basically it's the end point that matters, not the means to get there. It's also the greatest good for the greatest number, so you're trying to sort of look broadly across society. So it does exclude people on the margins, and decisions are made based on weighing up alternatives, and as I said, most marginalised can be overlooked. So going on to other ethical theories. We've got virtue ethics, that focuses on character and virtues, so compassion, honesty, integrity. Feminist ethics, so like the ethic of care, which focus on relationships, collaborations and partnerships. Contractarianism, which looks at the protection of individuals through social contracts. And communitarianism, which looks at the individual as part of a community, or as I was saying, collectivism earlier on. Right. So, are there any rules that you think should be universal? That is, should they apply to all cultures and times? And are there any exceptions to these rules? So the example here is about saying honesty is the best policy. So I guess we all know that there are usually exceptions to rules, but again, it's just good to get to know yourself and think which way do you come down? Do you agree with honesty being the best policy in general or all the time, or do you think that it's quite subjective? Are there situations in which lying is justifiable or desirable? Or I guess another thing to think about is how you might think sort of philosophically, but how that might vary compared to yourself. So I think of an example in one of my textbooks that I used to use, and it was an example of a town in Asia where the sort of overarching philosophy was tended to be communitarianism or collectivism, and there had been an earthquake, and the mayor of the town had a choice, as it were. He goes to the primary school where he's got the chance of rescuing the most people, or he goes to his house where he can rescue his 2 children. So we've got all the ethical dilemmas there. So I guess you might practice professionally in one way, but sometimes that can be at odds with your personal ethics, or sometimes, it can be hard to have an absolute perspective. So just start to explore some of the different theories that we looked at in the previous slides, and see which way you tend to lean. As I said, it is hard to have an absolute, but it's quite interesting just to see your preference. So, there obviously has been a history of values and ethics. So we've had a morality period, a values period, an ethical theory and decision-making period, an ethical standards and risk management period. So the value base of practice. It's a very contested territory with regards to ethics. We've got to consider cultural relativity, structural factors, poverty or racism, traditional values versus radical values, social care versus social control, universality of ethics, and how do we define ethics, and how do we distinguish what is global, what is local, and all of those types of questions.